Today on Doomed! Turns out we are not all in this together. The coronavirus is hitting frontline communities much harder than anywhere else. And on this episode of Doomed with Matt Binder, we'll break down why that is and what's going on here. Folks, as always, you can support this show by going to youtube.com/MattBinder and subscribing to the YouTube channel, subscribing to the audio podcast version of this show at doomedpod.com, and you can support this show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/MattBinder. Without any further ado, let me introduce you all to my guest tonight, pulling us up on the stream. Here we go. Joining me now is Lucy Block, Research and Policy Associate at ANHD, the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development. Lucy, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, Lucy, you, and along with the ANHD, put out this great report, and I want to, it's two different maps we're going to take a look at tonight, and there's a lot of data on these maps, and you're going to walk us through it. And what's, to me, it's not really, I guess, going to be astonishing to most of my listeners who follow this show, but I still think it's important to get the exact data. Now, obviously, what we hear in the news is a lot of we're all in this together from, celebs and politicians. We hear, today at Andrew Cuomo's 11:30 a.m. Daily conference, he said something like how, don't worry, I'm feeling this too, trying to make everyone feel like, he's in it just like the rest of us. You have a lot of famous people doing their little live streams, their Instagram streams, in their nice, beautiful homes with lots of rooms. Basically, it looks like they could possibly play a full-blown football game right in their living room, and they're telling us how bored they are and how hard this is for them. And obviously, this is something that people who listen to my show know is very angering to me. I can't stop talking about it. I think this is the 5th episode in a row. But, I mean, this data is going to just lay it out bare that these people who are saying this feel-good stuff are doing everybody no favors because it's just not true.
Yeah. I think it's important to look at both what kinds of inequities exist that are going to expose people to coronavirus in ways that are just not comparable at all to people who have the luxury of being safe in their home, having their source of income, whose problem is that they're bored and not used to being stuck inside. So there's a huge differential in the kind of exposure that people are facing based on the job that they have, whether they're a frontline worker, and then in things like in New York City, how far you live from your work. Do you have to take the subway and public transit? Like, there are many, many people who still have had to get on the subway and get on public transportation. Like a bike can be your best option potentially. So many people don't have cars. So there are all those factors. There is health infrastructure to take into account, overcrowding, the kind of housing that people are in, people who don't have homes. So there are just so many factors that contribute to the different kind of exposure that people have.
Right. And I'm actually so glad you brought up the public transportation issue up front, even before we've already dived into the maps and everything. Because one thing I've been wondering about, actually, and I bring it up now because I don't want to forget it because it's been really on my mind for weeks now, is, when you look at the communities where this is, where the coronavirus has hit hardest, you notice, in my view, I'm in Queens, Flushing, and I noticed that the communities hit the hardest are pretty much, you can't tell really from these maps that they're technically right along the 7 train line, but the 7 train goes through these communities that have been hit. And, as someone who's lived in Queens my entire life, and the 7 train has been the one and only subway to get to and from the city, I've wondered, actually, does that play a role, not just in general, the public transportation system? Because I think most people, uh, it seems like it's something that makes sense. But what I'm even saying further is the fact that the 7 train is the one and only subway that goes through these communities. So you have all these people packed on this one option. Do you think, from what you've seen in this data, that this has added to that the 7 train is sort of having that one option has added to the fact that these communities are basically going through this worse than many others?
Um, it could. I think one of the things that the map shows is that there are a lot of different factors that play into account, and the same thing that is making the prevalence of coronavirus just kind of go out of control in one place, like in Western Queens. I'm in Queens too. I'm in Elmhurst, so I'm along the 7 train line, but I'm also along 4 other train lines.
Mm,
That it's not necessarily the same in every part of the city. And you see real overlaps with different types of vulnerability or different types of factors. But it's not necessarily going to be one thing that will predict where there are these outbreaks of coronavirus across the city and beyond the
right,
city.
right. I guess my hang up with the 7 train was that obviously I ride it all the time, but also the idea that, these people who come from these different areas, not just along the 7 train line, but also, a lot of these other communities, when you look at this map, I'll show it on the screen when we start talking about it, they seem to actually be in areas where there's maybe 1 or 2 subway lines max. And you would assume that, being that, part of another thing we'll bring up when we look at these maps is what a lot of these people who live in these communities, what they do for a living. They
Yeah.
go to Manhattan to work. And you would think that, even though Manhattan is obviously a richer borough in terms of the people who live there, if these people are working there from these other from these harder hit frontline communities, if they're working in Manhattan, then ostensibly this virus would have passed on to people in Manhattan, maybe not at the same rate, but higher than what this map seems to show. So my assumption was, maybe if you had so many subway lines like Manhattan does, so many different modes of public transportation, along with obviously the buses and being able to obviously ride your bike in Manhattan in ways that you can't do in parts of the outer boroughs. If that could have possibly, been one of those factors.
Yeah. I think taking into account transportation is important and interesting kind of factor to lay on top of this. In the analysis that we did so far, we were really focusing on the sectors that people worked in and kind of underlying housing and economic conditions as well as race.
Now, I'm going to bring this map up on the YouTube channel. Let's look at the first one that you and the ANHD put out. I believe this is the first one. This is the COVID-19 impact in NYC map. And let me bring it up on the YouTube chat. If you're listening to the podcast, you'll be able to follow along, even if you're just listening to the audio version. This visual is helpful. You should check it out on the website, which is anhd.org. But if you're listening to the audio version, you'll follow along too, because I'll make sure it's not just visuals here. We'll be talking through it as well. Okay, so this map is up on the stream now. And so if you look at the map, let's go talk about this first. Let's talk about the predominant sort of work that the people in these communities seem to do. Because if you look, you're seeing basically deep red, which means the highest cases of coronavirus are in the Bronx, Western Queens, the outer parts of, deep into Brooklyn, the outer parts of Brooklyn, parts of Staten Island. I mean, Manhattan seems to have, shockingly, for maybe except for Upper Manhattan, and even Upper Manhattan, surprisingly, even when you talk about Harlem and Washington Heights, it seems like they've been shockingly actually luckier than the outer boroughs, even though they are in what I assume would be, more similar sort of socioeconomic conditions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You definitely see the Bronx bright red as a borough, and kind of surprisingly also Staten Island. And then Queens is really hard hit, which we've been hearing in the news. But the part of Western Queens where I am, in Elmhurst, Corona, and then farther north in the area that includes Rikers Island, is really, really hard hit. And then kind of the outskirts, the farther out areas of Southeast Queens, the Rockaways, and like you said, South Brooklyn.
Now, when we say, service workers, as it's labeled on this, what sort of jobs are we talking about?
Yeah, so we use census data for people working in the healthcare industry, in food preparation and serving, building and grounds cleaning and maintenance, and transportation and material moving occupations. So this was the broad sectors where we were doing our best to capture people who are essential workers and who are going to need to be like out and about and potentially exposed through this time.
And now, where did you and ANHD, where is this data from in terms of where are you pulling from to get this information laid out?
Yeah, this is the census. So it's called the American Community Survey. It's a subsample of the population, and the census takes this. It's not the census that everybody has to fill out this year. It's called the long form survey. So it's got all kinds of questions about your income and what you do and your means of transportation to work. And they put that out every year. So we take the 5-year average and then put it out by zip code to match the data that the New York City Department of Health has been making available because they've been publishing the cases of the zip code.
Now, when you look at this data, there's a number of different points here. We have the percentage of population with COVID-19. Now, this is just when you say with COVID-19, these are people who have been tested and have it. It's unknown exactly the degree in which they are symptomatic or possibly even asymptomatic. We don't know.
Yeah, but these are people who have been tested, and for the most part, people without symptoms are not getting tested.
Right, right, right. And that's interesting because, okay, so when you say, I'm glad you brought this up because it just, when you say that, when we talk about the people in these communities, now we're talking about people who live specifically in these communities. We're not talking about, for example, a service worker in Jackson Heights, Queens. They could be spending 12, 18 hours a day not in Jackson Heights, Queens.
Right. Yep. So this is where people live, not where they work.
And I want to go to this next point because I think it obviously dovetails with what they do for a living, and that's rent-burdened households. Mm-hmm. Can you describe exactly what you're talking about when we're discussing rent-burdened households?
Yep. So rent-burdened is defined as paying 30% or more of your income towards housing every month.
Now, do we generally have an idea in terms of, because one of the factors that seems to be affecting different populations, and we'll get into race in a minute, but one of the factors that appear to be affecting Black, Latino, Asian people in these communities is that a lot of them are multi-generational households. Is there any sort of data that overlaps with that in terms of, do we have actually data on these multi-generational households?
Yeah, it's not something that we've mapped against coronavirus. There is some data on multi-generational households, and I think that rent burden could, rent burden is not the best for looking at it, but overcrowded households is also a layer we added in here. Overcrowding is often the result of rent burden when people, the rent becomes so high that they just, have no other options, and looking at the neighborhood and potentially the whole city, they can't afford rent. People end up doubling up or moving in with family. So that's the result of such high housing costs.
Now, obviously, right. Multi-generational households can't overlap with, they can, there could be some overlap in overcrowded households, but obviously overcrowded households also could be, people living in, 6 people who are just roommates, friends or something living together, not necessarily they all be the same age or whatever. Is that what we also include in that, or?
I mean, yeah. So overcrowding is more than one person per room in the apartment, and that includes, if I'm not wrong, that includes the living room. I don't remember if it includes the kitchen. Um, so technically it could, but generally it's there. You're gonna need more than one person per bedroom for an apartment to qualify as overcrowded.
Now let's get to this next part because there's a an overarching, I guess, thing I want to get to. Let's get to the how it's affecting people of color. Let me pull this up on the map here so people on YouTube can see, or if you're watching on Periscope or Twitch or wherever you're watching this, it's multi-streamed. uh, so if you look at so when we on this map, people of color is Black, Latino, Asian American, anyone I guess who isn't who doesn't checkmark Caucasian on the
Oh, the census.
the
Yep.
census, right? Now, would that actually not consider Latinos, being that on the census they're supposed to now check mark Latino and then what their ethnicity is, and Latino is not considered, and it was confusing to me too when I was filling this out.
Yep. Yeah, it's not simple. And what makes it harder to measure this stuff and in data analysis is that race and ethnicity is classified differently by different institutions. So what the census uses is not necessarily what the Department of Health is going to use. That being said, the census treats race and ethnicity separately. So you have one category where you've got white, black, Asian, and American Indian, and some other categories. And then you've got one for Hispanic or Latino origin or not Hispanic or Latino origin. So you can have combinations. Um, and I am doing my best to remember. I know that this data is everyone who doesn't classify themselves as just white.
Got it.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing here is obviously, for the most part, it appears that people living in predominantly Black and Latino communities are being hit the hardest by coronavirus.
Correct.
And when you then overlap that with the other parts of the map, which is rent burden households, overcrowded households, service workers, people who work in the service industry, food preparation, you know, janitorial, maintenance, transportation. There's a lot of things that all come together in these specific communities that turn them into this deep red on the map that shows that they have the highest percentage of their population with coronavirus.
Yeah. I mean, that's the purpose of layering all these things together, is we really wanted to see whether the parts of the city that are that tend to show up as hotspots when you're looking at different kinds of socioeconomic data, if we see a map that looks similar when we map coronavirus. And unfortunately and not surprisingly, we did.
Now, I want to bring some of these questions up about this first map. Now, I brought up before about Manhattan and how it's not being, it's obviously there have been deaths from in Manhattan. It's, no one's getting by unscathed, and it's very difficult for everyone. But clearly, looking at the numbers, so we can understand what's going on here, Manhattan has relatively been able to get by much easier than the outer boroughs. But when you look at Harlem and Washington Heights, what do you think is going on that has helped those two areas of Manhattan sort of escape what the Bronx, which is not that far from those two areas, what they're going through?
Yeah. I don't know if I have a simple answer for that. For the most part, the case rate in Upper Manhattan, it is higher than Lower Manhattan, except for a couple of spots. But when you look at, it's a little bit of an anomaly compared to other parts of the city in terms of what it looks like socioeconomically, and also in terms of how many service workers are there, and why it seems to be less hard hit by COVID. So it's an interesting question. It's not one I know the answer to yet.
Right, because it is. If you look at this map, it is interesting how like you would assume that maybe there would be areas that were lighter on the map, being less a percentage of the population with COVID-19, and then when you see a hotspot area like a red part, you'd assume maybe the outer areas wouldn't be like would be a slightly lesser color. But then when you look at Jackson Heights, Corona,
Mm-hmm.
and then you look at Jamaica and Queens, it's like that's what you see there. But when you see you see that hot spot and then the zip codes outside, slightly less red, but still they're being hit. And then as you continue to move out, you have less of the population who have it. But with Manhattan going into the Bronx, I feel like you don't see that. It's just like jumps from this lighter color to this deep red.
Yeah. The questions that you're bringing up is also bringing up for me something that we still are not yet able to answer with the data that we have available to us, which is this is giving us positive cases in relationship to the population, which I think is a really important place to start. But something else that we have seen really clearly in the last few weeks as governments are making data on deaths available by race is that there are huge discrepancies. And that's something that we don't have geographically the way we do for this data. So we don't have that by zip code, but we do know that Black people are dying at twice the rate of white people in New York City.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's another thing that, I had so many questions going into this and I have them written out in front of me, but as we're just talking about it, they just get in there before I planned on getting there, but I better bring them up before I forget. What was the whole issue? Because I know that, we started locking down in New York in mid-March, like what, the 13th, 14th, 15th, somewhere around that time
Yeah.
period. But the days before that, there was a lot of talk of what was going on, and we saw this coming a little bit. Obviously, the lockdown just sort of happened very abruptly, but people were getting sick, and it took you and the ANHD put out your first report here weeks later in April 1st. And I'm not saying that to obviously knock you guys. What I'm saying is, what took the city so long to put out some of this information so that you guys could look at the data and map it out and create these maps where we could overlap them and see how it's affecting these communities?
I don't know. I really don't. The Department of Health, I mean, I have to say that they've actually been pretty responsive to the kind of pressure that advocates, and I know that some elected officials were putting on them to make this available. And I know that they have to get data from hospitals. But in terms of how quickly it would have been possible to start collecting it, I mean, we have test data. Now that I think about it, we have it starting at the beginning of March. So it did take a good 3 to 4 weeks to start getting the data breakdown geographically and get things really detailed. I think people had to push for it, and people didn't know that they needed it until the problem was looking really out of hand.
Right, because I remember in those, obviously that first week everyone's just whatever dealing with what's going on, this abrupt change in life. But then I remember in the weeks leading up to this data finally getting out, there was a real push, at least from what I was seeing online, from people saying, what's going on? Why don't we have the breakdown of this data?
Yeah.
Why don't we have, something to look over and try to understand?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Now, one last thing before we get to this next map. Why do you think, I mean, not why do you think, because we just discussed why, but specifically in terms of my neighbors over in the zip code 11368, which is right over from me. I'm in Flushing, and right by Main Street. And it seems like, literally, I walk a few blocks and I'm in this zip code. Why do you think 11368, these issues we just discussed, but specifically 11368, why has it been so ravaged by this, even when you compare to everywhere else. Like even when you look at the Bronx and Jamaica, this area of Queens just seems like, I mean, we heard what was happening at Elmer's Hospital and how it was what the nurses and doctors there were dealing with. Do we have any ideas specifically in terms of that very specific neighborhood? What why? I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, other than the horrible irony that that's the neighborhood of Corona,
Right.
I, it's a really dense place with really diverse immigrant population in these zip codes where the concentrations are so high. And I don't I think that overcrowding is an issue. I think that all of the kind of conflating factors around people immigrating and having, um, being undocumented, having limited access to information in English, I think that these can all compound, and the kinds of things that you have stacked up if you're undocumented, um, in terms of not being able to go get unemployment insurance, needing to be out working longer, and later into all of this, working in food industry and transportation. Like there's a really high percentage of people working in these high exposure occupations. And then, like you said, like this is where the 7 line goes through, and that's a subway line where I get off at, you know, 2 a.m. on a Sunday, and that train, like, there's standing room only. I'm continuously baffled by how many people are on that train line all of the time.
Right.
And it's like, I can never come up with an explanation. And people are working shifts around the clock. And that's why the train is so crowded that late at night. So I think that, people who are working those jobs just don't necessarily have the option of stopping.
Right. Now, I want to bring up one more thing about this map that's interesting to me. Now, my neighborhood, which is it is America's Chinatown. We have the largest Asian population in, I believe, the entire country. Certainly in New York City, and one thing that was happening, I've said on this show before that I sort of knew something was not, like, I'm not saying I'm Nostradamus and knew we were going to lock down and everything, but I noticed how serious my community specifically was taking the coronavirus in early February, when on a Saturday I'm walking down Main Street Flushing, Saturday night. Usually the restaurants are packed, the streets are packed, and it was empty. This is like the first week of February. Just sparse people. People are still going out, restaurants. It wasn't like crazy yet, but nowhere near what a regular Saturday night on Main Street Flushing is. And I remember thinking, this is weird, and it's not, and my assumption, and we saw a lot of, anti, Asian hate crimes go on in the city. I mean, we're still seeing this all across the country, and it's horrible. But then you look at the Flushing zip code on this map, and you would think, if you were someone who was like, yeah, this came from China, it's there, you're some person who's prejudiced against Asian people, and you think, oh, they must be, I don't want to go there, I don't want to go to eat Chinese food or something, because that's where I'm going to get it. Relatively, I mean, we're not as this area is not as light on the map as other areas of Queens, but compared to right next door and overall, we're not as hard hit. And I'm wondering what my assumption is, like I said, people who immigrated from China or other Asian countries have dealt with these sort of pandemics before, or had family who did. B, they live in multi-generational households more likely. And that's actually what I've seen in some, because I've noticed that out of all the food establishments in my area that have shut down, it's actually been like the Chinese food places that have pretty much all closed. Fast food, other, ethnicity establishments, they're pretty much still open. Maybe their times have changed or something like that, but they're pretty much still running. But the Chinese food places have closed. And I've read interviews where, people who run these places are saying, I live with older relatives. I can't, I can't put it up, like put their lives on the line for this. So I think that's what I think. What do you think from the data, or maybe not even, like maybe just from what you've seen as well, if the data doesn't help us understand that?
Yeah, I mean, what I noticed the same thing you did. I mean, there's a stark contrast between Corona and Flushing right next door. Um, and when you look at the race breakdowns of the death data, Asians are really underrepresented. So I think that, that's the same story as what you're telling. And I don't know if people were paying more attention to what was happening in Wuhan. I don't know if it was that people were familiar with what it's like to live through a pandemic. Beyond that, I don't have the answer, but it's something I saw too.
Yeah, it was really. And I also want to stress that when I say not hit as hard, I mean in my neighborhood there is a not exactly in my general where I live, but in the zip code 11358 11354. Excuse me. I can't believe I had to look for a second. I live in the zip code 11354. It was been in the news because one of the nursing homes in the area had like 25 deaths from coronavirus in a short amount of time. So when I say not hit as hard, that's still what we're dealing with here. But generally speaking, when you look at the zip codes surrounding Flushing, in terms of ones to our west, like Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, Corona, Flushing isn't, like you said, taking it as hard as those communities.
Yep.
Now let's go to this second map real quick, because this one is just as interesting to me. And this map looks at the same thing in terms of percentage of the population with coronavirus. But you break this down by where hospitals have been closing in NYC as we, leading up to this pretty much. Can you give us some information about this?
Yeah. So one of the things that ANHD really pays attention to is the way our city does land use, which is not always the sexiest of topics, but ends up being really, really important. So the land use laws and decisions that our government makes end up having huge consequences for what our neighborhoods look like and the kind of resources that people have access to, whether people can afford to stay in their neighborhoods, and whether they can stay in places that have businesses that are affordable to them, and the social, economic, and health infrastructure that they need. And so a question that came up for us as this is all happening is, where have hospitals closed through the last few decades? Why were they closed? What did they become? And how does that correlate with the kinds of other factors that we're looking at?
Now, I had this conversation I've been having a lot of conversations on Twitter lately about this sort of this stuff. But one thing that I've been particular about is, in my opinion, I get so angry when I see these articles about, oh man, Andrew Cuomo is so dreamy. He's my new boyfriend. He's my liberal boyfriend. It's truly. Now, and then getting more specific, I've had conversations with people when I bring up, how he's still been cutting. Wants to cut Medicaid during this pandemic. And also, I've had people tell me, what does he possibly have to do with the closing of these hospitals? When I bring up how these hospitals are closing, what is the role of Andrew Cuomo and state government in this map we're looking at here?
Ooh, so to be honest, I'm more familiar with the role of the city government in making these types of land use decisions.
You know what? Let's go with that then, because I think that actually says a lot as well. Because what I think we're seeing here, that has always been, I think, to people who've been paying attention to the relationship Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo has over the years, I think this has always been obvious to people and who've been paying attention to that, but I think it's brand new to so many people. And I think nothing shows it better than Bill de Blasio coming out just a few weeks ago. That wasn't even a few weeks ago, I think last week, saying how, public schools are closed for the rest of the year. And Cuomo coming out later that day saying, Bill de Blasio doesn't have the right to do that. What is he? The mayor of New York City? Who is he to say the New York City schools are closed? That's my decision. Now, I don't think people realize just how much state government has say over New York City. Bill de Blasio does not run the MTA. That's Andrew Cuomo. So I think, while you're going to dive into the city government part of it, I think there's some things that can be extrapolated in terms of, how much say does New York City have when the budget that they receive is, given to them by the state in many aspects.
Sure. Yeah, there are a lot of issues where we think that we should have full control over what's happening, and our transportation system, our housing system, and our school systems are some of the most common areas where we think that Bill de Blasio should be able to wave his hand and make something happen, but the state actually gets.
I feel like
that's the same.
Right. I feel like that's how it works in most cities, right? Is New York City? I don't know if you know this offhand. I should probably look into this, but I do feel like you don't see this in other cities.
We have, a lot of it comes out of the 70s fiscal crisis in the state, saying that New York didn't know how to handle its shit, so they were going to take over.
Right. And who was mayor in the 70s? Interesting. Right. Yeah, all right, let's just continue. So what role does right? I know. You know what I'm saying? What role does city government have in what we're looking at here in terms of, because if you look at this map for people who are just listening to the audio, I think I've been pretty good actually about the whole visual thing up until I forgot to explain this whole hospital thing. If you look at this map with the hospitals, the closed hospitals, it does seem like they're pretty even spread. There are quite a few in Manhattan actually who closed down. So what do you think is just more so that the idea that so many hospitals completely dispersed all over the city, like it's pretty even disbursement if you look at this map. Upper Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, middle of Queens, out in really Western Queens, you got Upper Brooklyn, looks like Greenpoint or Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and then you get all the way down Lower Brooklyn, looks like maybe Red Hook, and then Staten Island. These hospital closures seem to be fairly dispersed. Is that just more of a overall thing to take in about the worry that New York wasn't going to be able to handle an influx of people going to the hospital?
There's definitely the factor that we undervalued our health infrastructure and that system, and that means that we are not as prepared for the crisis. Looking at Queens, you've got 4 hospitals in close proximity to each other. One is down the street from Elmhurst Hospital, which is the hardest hit in the city, possibly. There were we heard about 13 deaths happening in a period of 24 hours. And you have a really, really high prevalence of coronavirus. So we just, looking at where the hospitals have closed, I think gives us a much clearer picture of why it's a problem when we have something like this come up. And at the same time, something that we thought was important to look at is why do these decisions get made and what happens with this land? 40% of these hospitals were turned into, for the most part, high-end luxury housing that is out of reach for the people who are getting hardest hit by this, people who are housing insecure. And the land use legacies of the past decades come back to haunt us now that we're faced with this. We have still quite a bit of public land in the city, but oftentimes our city government will look at that land and say, it is worth so much more as apartments. And so what we should do is we should move our stuff around. We should consolidate it into one place, or we should rent out somebody else's private building as the government so that we can sell that land. And a developer can build a ton of residential space on there. That is what's going to produce the highest rents per square foot. And that's how we need to look at development in the city. Um, and we waste our public land. We don't use it for what the public needs it for because we're looking at it from like a purely real estate development mindset. So that's a major problem that affects us in New York City. It kind of hits us in all kinds of different realms, and we are usually looking at the housing realm at ANHD and how that pans out. But we thought it was also important to focus on our health infrastructure.
Now, on the same map, you have laid data in that wasn't on the previous map actually, along with the closed hospitals data point, is also the median household income. Now I'm looking at this, and it seems like again these hospital closures are pretty much in high income areas and low income areas. You know, the use of even these hospitals in these lower income areas, do we know exactly did like luxury high rises go up even there in these areas that are low income?
Yeah, it varies a little bit, but if you take St. John's Hospital, down the street from Elmer's Hospital and very close to where I live, that has become luxury housing. They call them lofts, and it's across the street from the mall. And they actually had um, an open house sign when the reports were happening about Elmhurst Hospital being completely overloaded. They were out marketing their apartments.
It is it is I'm honestly I can't understand the idea behind closing hospitals and putting high rises up. It just baffles me. I mean, it's just stunning. Even though it shouldn't be, it's like technically not surprising. Like if like I'm not like whoa I had no idea, but just it's just the thought process that goes behind there. Now, do you think that this is really what do you think is going to happen going forward in terms of like does the ANHD? I know you guys do a lot of work with like you said with land use and housing developments. Do we think this is? I mean, obviously it's too early to tell right now. Who knows what the world is going to look like and when it's going to look like, whatever it ends up looking like that. But do we think that this is going to really change how things were proceeding? Because I mean, in my perfect world, obviously, this wouldn't be happening. But if it did happen in my perfect world, we would all take a good look at where we were, where society was going, how we were doing these things, how we were, putting certain things like wealth and luxury high rises on a pedestal, and we would then rethink our healthcare system, how we use land, housing. I mean, I know it's not on these maps, but it's what you guys deal with all the time. We have April 1st came and went, and there was zero protections pretty much laid out for people who rent, for tenants. Mm-hmm. The only thing they were promised is you can't get evicted right now. Well, great, that's nice. If you don't pay your rent and your landlord wants to evict you, you have a few months to sit in a house where your landlord hates your guts and then is going to evict you when this is all over as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. So what do we want to see going forward? We know that we're bad at learning from our mistakes, but I think one thing that was important to do with this map and this analysis is draw the line between the failures we made in the past and the ways that it's impacting us today. Because we don't do a good job in New York City of looking at our history over a period of decades and looking at development decisions that we made and figuring out how that's affecting us now. And we do completely piecemeal development-driven decisions in the city. We don't plan out what we need as a place, as one place that operates as an entity. So ANHD has been focused on pushing comprehensive planning that would be equitable in the city, that would actually take into account what different communities have and need and allocate resources depending on those things, rather than individual decisions about rezoning a neighborhood or a few blocks here and there based on, very kind of small scale interests in that land. You take the interest of the developer who owns it and what they can maximize, and potentially, some of the surrounding community. You're not taking into account what that neighborhood has or doesn't have versus a borough over. Those decisions really matter. It matters that every neighborhood in New York City have adequate access to hospitals, to the schools they need, to affordable housing, and to jobs. So I think that this map really shows us the importance of actual equitable comprehensive planning in the future.
One thing that I I just thought when we were discussing all this is a lot of these, luxury high rises that go up do have to have like affordable housing set aside. And haven't there been a lot of these cases where those specific, units have almost like a different, like they're in the same building, but they're almost in a different building, like they have different entrances and things like that. Isn't that something that's sort of rampant, or is that maybe more specific to just certain places?
It was a big problem. I remember in 2016 there were some changes to try to regulate that and make sure that developers needed to make those apartments look the same as the other ones, but they find ways with amenities because the market rate tenants will have immediate access to the amenities in the building, but the affordable housing tenants will have to pay extra for them. And I don't think that the requirement to give people the same quality of housing is true for all types of affordable housing programs that we have. I think it's only true for some.
Right, right. What I have in this fantasy scenario where we obviously will never have this data because it's so niche, this idea, but to be able to see if there was, if the difference of people who, if it exists, sounds possible to me, plausible, of people who had coronavirus living in the same building but are part of this like separation, like folks who are paying for the paid the big bucks for their nice luxury apartment, and then the people in that same building who have to go in a side entrance because they have the affordable housing unit. That would be, I mean, I don't know, an interesting look.
Yeah, I don't have that for you yet.
Yeah, I don't think any. It sounds like something that would only exist in my mind, to be honest. But I appreciate you hearing me out on that. Lucy Block of ANHD, thank you so much for joining me today and helping me break down this data. I've been looking at it since you guys put it out, and it's so, just to click those little, if you haven't, if you're listening to the audio or you're even just watching the live stream, go to anhd.org and view the maps yourself. Click the check marks so you could see where things overlap. And it just like, you hear these things, some of it may seem obvious, but to see it and see how this breaks down, it's still something that's super, super interesting to me. And I really appreciate you taking the time to break it down with me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Matt.
Take care. Have a good night.
You too.
All right. Bloop, bloop. There goes Skype. And I forgot to ask her. I wanted to ask, based on what Donald Trump said in his conference today, his coronavirus presser, would you recommend either injecting Clorox or Lysol to fight coronavirus? Darn. All right. Let's go to the patron only half of the show. Patreon.com/Matt Binder. You can support this show if you can do so financially. I really appreciate it. We are literally 2 patrons away from hitting the goal for the first time. Every time I get close, something happens, and we have a slew of patrons say, I have to cancel. I'm so sorry. I'll be back as soon as I can. every time. But we are closer than ever. Patreon.com/MattBinder. Um, again, if you cannot afford to do so right now, especially, I totally get it. Do not put your money down if you can't, please. If you lost your job, if you're unemployed, if you're living off $1,200, all that, that sweet $1,200, please don't. You can support this show if you're in those situations by subscribing at youtube.com/MattBinder, leaving an iTunes review or a Google Play review, wherever you leave your podcast reviews, by subscribing to the podcast at doomedpod.com, telling all your friends about the show, telling your favorite podcasters and YouTubers and Twitchers about the show. Tell them you want to see me on their show and vice versa. You want them on my show. Follow me on Twitter at Matt Binder. Search for me on all the other social networks, Matt Binder, and follow me all over too, whether it be Instagram, Facebook, wherever, TikTok. I don't even use it, but I'm there. Yeah, that's the deal. That's the deal, my friends. Hope everyone's hanging in there. We're now a month into this. So far, the worst case scenario models have been avoided. And that is, one thing there's a lot of crap out there. And after this episode and discussing these communities that are just being decimated, comparatively to everybody else, one thing that has been truly inspiring to me is if you had told me that this country would have to lock down and everyone would have to stay inside for the good of not just people's individuals in the individual, their individual self, I should say, but for their neighbors and people in their community and just society in general. We live in a society. I would have said, there's way too many a-holes in this country to successfully do that. It would never happen. And yes, we see the a-holes who are protesting, who want to reopen, because they don't understand that one of the reasons why we avoided the worst case scenario models is because what we're doing now. But that is a very small subset, it seems, of people. The majority of this country seems to be abiding to these lockdown orders, these stay-at-home orders, these self-quarantine requests, as best as they possibly can. And it is, I said a lot on this show that this is shocking, and then I add the clarification that, you know what I mean. It's not surprising to see this because I know that's how shit is. But it still hits you. This is actually something that has been surprising to me. Because I would have expected the opposite. I would have expected that most people would, maybe not most, but a much bigger number would not have listened to this. And it's maybe we're not as far gone as I thought as a country. We're close, but not as far gone as I had thought. So that's my little high note during these terrible times. Stick around for the patron-only show if you're a patron subscriber or if you're tuning into the live stream. Lots of content since I've been home. I've been doing more than one episode a week. I'm going to try to keep it going. And if I do one episode a week, they are really long. Like, for example, Saturday night's episode with Jared Holt, where we watched we took 2.5 hours to watch the QAnon documentary. I appreciate everyone for the kind words and rave reviews of that. I had a lot of fun doing it. Check it out if you haven't already. Otherwise, see you all next time on Doomed. We are back on the show. Hello, everybody. If you're watching on the YouTube live stream, you can see that my face mask that I ordered has finally arrived. I'm going to take it off now because I can tell that the sound is going to be muffled talking into a face mask. Yeah, in Flushing, on Main Street, on Main Street, like the count, on Main Street, on Main Street, there were people, trying to sell right off the street, disposable N95 face masks for price gouging for way more than they should be selling them for, and people in the community were giving them tons of shit as they walked by. But yeah, it took a while for those masks to come. My son has a cute little mask. We got him too. I don't know. This is for the 4-year-old. The baby doesn't have a mask because the baby's not going to wear a mask. The 10-month-old is not going to leave a mask on her face. She's 10-month-old. She's going to be 11 months tomorrow. Happy 11-month birthday, Enid. She will be 11 months, well, maybe today if you're listening to the show today. Or maybe it's a belated birthday if you're listening to the show after the live stream. Ryan says your beard is making your mask ineffective. Right. I saw that CDC thing. Sorry, the beard's not going. Sorry. I don't know if you guys have this going on in your communities right now, but the signs are starting to go up around here that say, the takeout only signs have always been there, but now there's signs I've noticed that say, do not enter if you're not wearing a mask. So it sucks because masks aren't as easy to come across yet. But you're going to need a mask. You're going to need the mask. All right, let's go to the comments. Renee says the eugenics of the class war and frontline workers, i.e. the Bronx being hit the hardest. I just realized I did not use the term class war in that first half. What a stunning oversight on my part. I'm actually disgusted with myself for not saying that. I mean, I think I inferred in many ways when we were talking about the luxury high-rises and really a tale of two cities when we discuss how people live in some areas. But really disgusted with myself for not bringing up the two words class war. It's all right. Sometimes you're on top of everything, and other times you think you got everything, but you missed a few things. Renee, you know about those Caterpillar buses? And you're talking about it somewhere else. But yeah, we got them too. Like the two connected buses that look like they have the mid part right in the middle that like looks like they were suction cupped together or whatever. Oh, Zoe asks, why can't you ride a bike in the outer boroughs? Well, you can, but a lot of people travel from the outer boroughs into Manhattan to work. And depending on where you live in the outer boroughs, you really can't do that. Like, for example, I live in New York City. I live in Queens. I live on the 7 train line. I live on the last stop of the 7 train line. Takes me anywhere from about 40 minutes to an hour just to get into Manhattan on the subway. You can ride that via a bike every morning if you want. You'll be really tired by the time you get to work. You'll also have to leave a lot earlier, wake up a lot earlier. I don't know how long it would take. 2, 3, in fact, probably not even 2, 3, 4 hours. I don't even know. It would take a while, it seems like. I don't know how. I've never ridden a bike. To be honest with you, I can't ride a bike. But So, Zoe, if you're asking me why can't I ride a bike in the outer boroughs, it's because I actually physically cannot ride a bike. Don't know. Never learned. Really bad at it. Don't have the balance for it. But I also answered the more general question that I think you were really asking. Renee says, I feel like a Beastie Boys song about the boroughs coming on. Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, and Staten. Right. IAFC, my punk band, had a song where we shouted out the five boroughs. We had that song out before the Beastie Boys did theirs. It's the truth, actually. When did that song come out? Hold on, I gotta check it out. I'm positive it came out before. Because we shouted it out in a very similar fashion, actually. An open letter to New York, right? That's what it was called? Right. Open letter to NYC. They released it in November 2004. We made that song in winter 2003. So, sorry, Beastie Boys. We were the first to shut out the five boroughs during that time period. Let's go back to the comments here. My dad answered the question for Zoe as well. He's in the chat. Some people in outer boroughs do ride bikes into the city, but once you get to your place of work, there may not be places to leave them safely. That too, and also everything I said. Corey says, I should have asked this of Lucy. I didn't see this. Corey on Periscope says, do you think we're going to see a shift in how we approach housing in a post-pandemic world? We should, but do I think we will? No. And I actually think housing is going to be one of the areas that the fight is going to be hardest for. There really is been little movement on that front, to be quite honest with you. Like Medicare for all, as hard as that's going to be, at least we're at a place where it's really popular. And a lot of people are now saying, yeah, we should. Healthcare is a right. You pose that same question, is shelter, is housing a right? And I don't think we're there yet. I mean, just look at, I can tell you right now, in certain, you look in certain areas online, you can find neighborhood like Facebook groups that are full on complaining about tenants not paying their rent during all this and sincerely doing the whole woe is the landlord thing, like acting like landlords are the most, vulnerable people on earth. It is stunning to see, to be quite honest. And I think a lot of people feel that way, more people than should, that the idea that a large population, a large portion of this country has to pay someone every month a huge chunk of their salary just to be able to have a roof over their head that they don't own, that they won't be able to, recoup that money if they ever have to move by selling the property because they don't own the property. There's a whole class of people that own these that owns housing, and they have their mortgages being paid off by the renters, and I mean they have all this property that cost them nothing. They're probably making, a lot of them make money off the tenants. Some of them even, it's their full time. I'm talking about mostly even just people like not even the big like real estate company businesses. I'm talking about people who just invest in real estate. And there's people who think, yeah, that's a legitimate business. A lot of older people do that, which is why that's problematic as well. I mean, when it comes to healthcare, old people obviously aren't as supportive of Medicare for all as the rest. But when it comes to Medicare for all, we're just asking them to share what they already got without losing anything. Housing. There's a lot of old people who invest in real estate. And if you dare try to bring up something about a different world where we're not, attached to our rent, I mean, they will. You want to bring voters out? Old people will come out in bigger droves than ever to save that shit. I could guarantee it. I truly think that's going to be one of the hardest areas to make movement on. Let's go back to the comments here. Jeff, the leftist on Periscope, points out West Harlem is more affluent than East Harlem. Zoe is shocked that there's a part of Queens called Jamaica. And I think I made it. I guess I should have made it more obvious to people who don't live in New York City. But I think if you were listening, you were following along. We laid it out up front. Latino and Black communities are predominantly being affected by this. So the communities I would name that were predominantly hit: Jackson Heights, Corona, Elmhurst, Jamaica. Those are predominantly Latino and Black communities. Jamaica is a predominantly Black neighborhood in Western Queens. I sort of went into that episode trying to really be as, I don't know, I prepared in a way that I was like, all right, this is going to be an episode that anyone can listen to. So let me make this palatable for everybody, I guess. It wasn't done purposefully. But now that I think about how I prepared for it, I might have been thinking that way when I was writing my questions and notes. My dad points out that East Harlem only serviced by 4 or 5 express lines, 6 local. West Side has 1 local, 2 or 3 express, and the ACDB lines. It's a great point, Dad. Which makes me think I may be onto something. That it's not just the public transportation in general. It is the options and how well served by public transportation. It's less packed than East Side lines, right? Renee says not Koreatown. There's a Koreatown here in Flushing, yes. I didn't want to bring it up as the most because I'm actually not sure. I'm pretty sure there's areas of California that probably have a bigger Koreatown. But I know our Chinatown is the biggest in New York City, if not the biggest in the country. I believe it actually might be the biggest Asian community outside of China in the entire world, actually. I'm considering releasing this members half later in the week for everybody, because I think this is a really important conversation we're having to help even further explain the first half of the show. Because I think maybe as I'm talking to you guys in a more conversational tone, obviously there's some New Yorkers here in the comment section, we're breaking down the demographics of where we discussed in the first half at a much deeper level. Because obviously I was focused on the data that we were looking at on that map in the first half. So maybe I'll do that. I'll give it to you members, patrons first. I'll wait a couple. I'll probably put it out over the weekend. Maybe later in the week. Maybe after the weekend. Maybe like Monday or Tuesday next week. Zoe says, why is it called Flushing? I can't help but think about a toilet. Sorry. Right, I mean, that's a joke you could have. I'm actually not sure. Never really, my dad will probably drop it in there. Oh, there you go. My dad did. Early settlers were Dutch. Flushing was a city in Holland. There you go. Umar says Italy has the most corona, so you need to doubt Italians. Don't go to Little Italy. Gotta tell you, there's not much of Little Italy left in New York. It really isn't. It's unfortunate. Uh, there's not much of a Chinatown left in Manhattan either. That whole area is. I do know that Astor Place around St. Mark's, where used to be like a known for the subculture. It was like a whole block of punk rock t-shirt stores, thrift shops, record stores. That area is completely changed, and a bunch of like Japanese ramen places have opened up. Japanese establishments that it's now called Little Tokyo, and that's probably one of like the few off the top of my head areas like that have actually developed new developments there instead of us losing like Chinatown and Little Italy because the city has become so expensive. Um, Zoe says the U.S. is full of cities named after known European cities for some reason. It's weird. Thinking about it, did I even make it clear that the whole episode was going to be so New York City centric? I mean, I guess it makes sense if I'm talking about the communities hit hardest by coronavirus. And we are literally talking about New York, which obviously, compared to even other states, there's been no place hit harder. We have somewhat like 250,000 plus cases in the whole state, with the large majority being in New York City. New York City is the epicenter. The 5 boroughs are where most of the cases are. I said epicenter, the epicenter. The state closest to us, New Jersey, obviously both location-wise and what I'm talking about in terms of number of coronavirus cases, has not even hit 6 digits yet. So New York is really, and again, this is based on testing, so we don't really, I think New York actually will probably end up having more, as well as all the other states. But we really have, so I guess it's obvious. The second half of the show probably definitely has to go up with the first half. My dad points out Manhattan named after Native Americans who lived there, same on Long Island. Ryan says, I love Lucy so much better than her dad, Walter. Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't think of that. For those who don't know, there's a running gag for former and current members of the Majority Report. There's a libertarian professor, yes, a professor named Walter Block, who has debated Sam a handful of times on the show. A few of them were when I was there, and I believe one was after I left. And you just have to go watch honestly have to watch them yourself. Some of the funniest content you will ever hear in your life. Truly. Just here's a little shout out for people who know what I'm talking about. Hey Sam, have you ever played chess? You ever played a little game called Chess, Sam? Wait. Shut up, Sam! Shut up! Oh my god. So he says Walter was so bizarre, honestly. Ryan says Bullprog is the goat for that song and video. Oh, my dad says there's a cedar cat debate. All right. Um, who is the cat debate? What are you talking about? Oh, right. You texted me about this. I was thinking for a second. I totally forgot all about that. Right. Creationist Cat did a thing with Sam Cedar from the Majority Report. Right. Um, let's see. Grim in the chat is no fan of Michael Brooks. Are you, Grim? Zoe says Matt should interview Walter next. All right. Wait, did Anna leave TYT? Asks Grim. Did Anna leave Young Turks? I haven't seen that. Umar says when I was doing the Patreon call before, if you don't have the money, take a loan and sponsor Matt. Right. uh, Grim does not like the Michael Brooks universe, does he? If you want me on Casual Friday on the Majority Report, you guys need to email Sam. It worked. He had me on early this year because you guys contacted him. Zoe says Matt should do gaming Twitch streams with Matt, actually. I would be down. Let him know that. Grim says I should do Twitch streams with Sean of Antifada. I'd be down with that too. Zoe says the Matt Jamie episode was one of my fave, honestly. Of the Majority Report, right. Why, thank you. And I was really sick that episode too. I was honestly just probably the sickest I've been in years. And I still came in and did it, and you're saying that was one of your favorite episodes? My dad says how Matt is still waiting for a callback after doing Sam that solid for guest hosting with Jamie when he had family obligations. Right. Rad Dad says I am not cutting my hair until I start losing it. Oh, because there was a discussion. Okay, because Grim said I'm not cutting my hair until Trump is out of office. I'm not. I trim my hair every couple months because there's a point where it gets so long that I hate how it feels. But I like long hair. I like how it looks, and also obviously I will not have it forever, so I'm going to fully take advantage of it while I got it. You know what I mean? Matt and Jamie should do more shows together more often, right? Listen, I'm not gonna trim my beard to make my mask more effective, Lord Arion. Not doing it. Umar says just wear a lucha mask. Zoe says I don't have any mask. I wear a scarf when I go out. Yeah, I have the scarf too, and we were using different face coverings up front. But also, it's hot. It's getting hotter, and I'm gonna get a very sweaty beard and neck. um, Grim says, I think gloves are more important than masks, but I need to get gloves. I agree. I actually think that's a good case. Yes. But as my dad points out, following up, some stores make you take off gloves, though. Yeah, I think the masks I think are supposed to be more predominant, more effective, because coronavirus specifically spreads mostly through the air when people sneeze, like direct someone coughing or sneezing in the general direction of you in close quarters, which is why social distancing 6 feet is so important. Yes, it lives on things that those people touch, but I think there's various variables that make that not as effective in terms of the virus getting you sick as your face. From my understanding, that touching something and getting the virus on you in that way still requires you to touch your nose, your mouth, your face, some sort of orifice where this virus will get inside you. If you stay away from that, you can control that. Obviously, it's hard, obviously, because people just naturally touch their face, scratch their nose, whatever. I get it. But if you monitor that and you take care of that, you don't have to do it for long. Just constantly make sure you're using hand sanitizer, washing your hands. You can make sure it doesn't get you sick, even if you have it on your hands or whatever. But obviously, if something's just flying in the air and you're just breathing as normal, your mouth is just open as normal, like you're just, it's doing what you're doing or whatever, it's harder to have some sort of, say in that, control over that. So I think that's why the mask is more predominant. It makes sense. Midnight Pizzamon says, I have a few masks my mom's made me. Jack on Periscope says, numbers are totally fake. We have no idea of real COVID death count. Well, if you're saying we don't know the real COVID caused death count because it's too low, the numbers, I agree with you. We don't know how many. This is the at least number. If you're pushing the conservative right-wing trope that the numbers are actually lower because they're just chalking everything up to coronavirus, nothing could be further from the truth. There's some idea out there within the right-wing circles, that, if someone dies of asthma and they have coronavirus, but the asthma is what killed them, then they didn't die of coronavirus. They just happened to have coronavirus. How often do otherwise healthy people die of asthma? We're seeing underlying conditions that people are able to live with for many, many years, decades, suddenly drop dead in a matter of days or weeks because the coronavirus exacerbated their conditions. So yeah. I've seen some stupid memes out there of someone getting into a car accident or something and them getting decapitated or something like that. And they do a test and that person had coronavirus. Chalk it up to death by coronavirus. Ha ha ha, very funny. That's not the equivalent. I guess in your scenario, let me think of an equivalent. The equivalent would be if the coronavirus was all of a sudden grew into a humanoid form, grabbed your wheel that you were driving, and purposely turned it so you flew off a bridge and perfectly got decapitated, trying to actually kill you. Then yeah, that would be the equivalent. So dumb. Always check the chat, Matt. Says Renee. Oh, also makes sense because, um, did I miss super chats? I totally forgot the 2 shows in a row. I forgot to shout it out. If you believe it, I forgot to shout out super chats during the friggin' 2.5 hour long episode I did with uh Jared on Saturday. That's how dumb I am. Uh, okay, good. I haven't missed any super chats. Which also means I did a terrible job letting people know about super chats. Because I was getting super chats every show. And the 2 I forgot to mention, there goes the super chats. None. Um, Zoe says there's only 5 boroughs of New York. That seems small. I gotta say I know fuck all about New York. I mean, the boroughs are quite big. I mean, each one is an island, except for the Bronx, I think, right? Yeah. The Bronx is connected to the larger New York State mass of land. Manhattan is its own island. Staten Island is its own island. Brooklyn and Queens are both a part of Long Island, which also contains Nassau and Suffolk counties that aren't part of New York City. That's more technically called Long Island, even though, again, Queens and Brooklyn are on physically Long Island, the land mass known as Long Island. Oh, shit. I forgot to shout out the Patreons. Forget it. I really got to do this. The patrons. I really got to do a full-blown... I got to give this freebies to everyone, don't I? No doubt about it, right? Because I got to shout you guys out. How could I miss this stuff? Let me do it now before we go any further. Before I forget more. I'm totally out of it. Jeez. These are the folks that make this show possible. Abigail T, Adam Q, Alan B, Amanda H, Andrew C, Andrew H, Angela, Ari R, Baka, Ben, Benji, Bobby M, Brosnan, Champagne Kami, Chris F, Christine H, Cindy G, Colin R, Connor R, Cracker Barrel, CT Apollinar, Cynthia J, D, Dan K, excuse me, I did that again. I did that last week, didn't I? Dank Uger, Dave K, David Z, Daya, Doug H, Douglas V, Dragon Slayer, Eugene B, Fraz K, Free Hat, FTW, Greywind, Greg D, Grim, Hitesh, Igor D, Jack D, Jacob W, Jameson Test, Janelle A, Jasmine H, Jeremy M, JLS, John B, John S, Jonathan B, Joseph H, Joseph R, Joyce M, excuse me, Justin S, Katie S, Kaushal, Lisa D, M, Carol, Mariah, Mark S, Max W, me, Melissa M, Mitch V, Michael B, Michael J, Michael M, Mr. Danks NS, Nicole A, Namde Net, Noel Style, Odeth, Paul M, Penelope D, Qster, Rad Dad, Remy, Ryan, Scott R, Seth K, Sean H, Sheena A, Silicone Baby, Stephen R, Stephen S, Steve A, TM, Tammy G, Terrence R, Hypervisor, This Is Not Pizza, Tina M, Todd K, Tom M, Why That Tie Guy, Wutopian, and Zoe G. Alright, let's start wrapping this bad boy up, right? Oh, we got some upstate New Yorkers in the chat. I don't know if you want me to read who you are and blast where you're saying you are, so I'll leave that in the chat without mentioning specifics. Yeah, Upper New York is dealing with this really bad too. Renee says Matapacos didn't read about the anarchist self-care initiative here in Chile. I did not. Zoe says there's more than one Chinatown in New York. Yes, there's a Chinatown in Manhattan. There's a Chinatown in Queens. There's a Chinatown in Brooklyn. Right. Lord Ariane says you have Chinatown in Lower Manhattan, and then there's an Asian community in Queens, which really, honestly, is the new Chinatown. I mean, it's what it's called. Quarantine on Periscope says no one has been hit by coronavirus. It's 5G we should be worried about. I will do an episode on this. Obviously, it's a conspiracy. Obviously, it's bullshit. It's bunk. It's ridiculous. But I'm gonna be doing an episode specifically on that for sure. Quarantine says the hospitals are empty. I'm a nurse. Everyone is off. Corona is a cover-up for 5G. Very funny, Quarantine. I'm assuming you're joking. Because that's not true, obviously. Alan on Periscope, who is not my dad, says America has 4 times more people than Italy. Right. Yes. Lord Ariane says Staten Island may as well be Jersey as far as I'm concerned. Now my dad jumps in. Connecticut areas hit hardest were those with large population who work in NYC. They commute through Grand Central Station, right? Wait, are you serious, Rad Dad? This can't be. You're joking, right? One of my exes dated Walter Block, which should have been a huge red flag for multiple reasons. Get out of here. I don't believe you. I don't believe you, Rad Dad. Lord Arion says Anna did not leave TYT. She hosted today. Don't know where that came from in the chat, but yeah, I should reach out to Jamie and we should do more shows together. Even if I go on Antifada or she comes on here. Even if it's not majority report. My dad's talking about how bald he is. I'll read this. It's funny. My dad says, tell me about not having hair forever. My last haircut was about a year ago. I can do a short ponytail now, but look stupid with my horseshoe-shaped male pattern baldness. And the reason I read that specifically is because of this great comment that Rad Dad dropped following up at my dad. It works for Jesse Ventura. And I especially had to read that after the rumors that Jesse Ventura is going to run for president. God, that'd be so funny. Champagne Kami says Matt is so much better at analogies and metaphors than Sam Cedar. How so? Mariah says, I didn't watch the QAnon thing live, but I fucking loved it. Thank you, Mariah. I really appreciate that. Maybe what I should do. Now, this is going to require a lot of work because there's not every day one of these movies come out. But maybe every week, well, every week would probably be too much. Maybe every 2 weeks or every month, I do an episode of the show where I compile the most insane shit of that month. Maybe, I don't know if I could compile an hour or 2.5 hours like we did the other one. Maybe I'll compile 20, 30, 40 minutes. Probably closer to 20 unless it's some real good shit out there. Longer clips perhaps even. And we do something like that. like clips is the craziest news segments, the craziest interviews, on cable news. That would be fun. Because it's harder with this movie stuff. Because it needs to be uh, public domain or open source, or able to do that without getting a copyright strike, like I was able to do for the last one. Oh, funny story. I didn't get a copyright strike for the QAnon thing with Jared, but I got a copyright claim, which means the video can stay up, but a company claims they own it and would like to make money off of it, and so I can't make money off of it. So I can keep it on my channel, I keep watching it, but they take the money. What am I going to do about that? Fine. But here's the interesting thing. This guy didn't claim it, the filmmaker. My guess, and that's why I felt safe doing the film, he was not going to ever claim it. He knows that he used a lot of footage without permission. So he's doing it, just as, a free commentary, educational resource, critique. I got a copyright claim from whatever company owns the rights to that George Carlin clip that he played in that the filmmaker of the QAnon film played in the film. So because of that, less than a minute George Carlin clip, that company is basically siphoning off any money I made from that. Not a lot, I guarantee you. I could probably a dollar or two max. I could probably, honestly. Not much money. Maybe if I got lucky, depending on, because it's a pretty long video, I guess. Maybe total of $5, something like that. Who knows? But thanks, Mariah. Long story short, thanks, Mariah. Zoe says, do the boroughs have their own mayor/administration? Yes and no. Bill de Blasio is the mayor of New York City, which means he is the mayor of Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island. Every borough, though, has a borough president. And, there's a Queens borough president, a Bronx borough president, a Brooklyn borough president, Staten Island borough president, Manhattan borough president. But their role really is limited. They really seek more so to promote the borough. I believe they do have some funding capacity, some disbursement of funds capacity. How money is spent in that borough, that the borough has for events and things like that. But it's a very limited role. It's really more just like the title. And each borough has, a DA, their own DA, district attorney, their own, everything, such, pretty much. But New York City, including all 5 boroughs, is run by the mayor. And then, even as I explained the first half, even the mayor can, for the most part, is shackled by the governor of New York State. My dad points out that there's some new names in the Patreon. Yep. Grim says, I'm not that bothered by you missing the credit rolls, Matt, but thanks for doing it. Now I'm going to shout you guys out for as long as possible, I'll tell you. Oh, and of course, as Renee points out, New York City Transit also includes a lot of areas of New Jersey. So the transit, the Bridge and Channel Transportation Authority, we run that with New Jersey. So there's also a lot of overlap there in terms of who writes the rules. If you remember Chris Christie shutting down the bridge. So there's also New York runs some of that, and New Jersey runs some of that. We got to work together with a completely different state for an agency that's straddling both. Umar says Jesse Ventura body slams Trump out of office. That would be fun, right? So he says, wait, Jesse Ventura is progressive. He is a Jimmy Dore type, put it that way. A little bit of a loony left guy. Some things, great on progressive, yes. Other things, he's a bit of a conspiracy theorist. Bit weird in some aspects. He's all over the place in some areas. Renee called him an independent libertarian free thinker. Yeah, in some areas I would say that's correct. Mariah says, Matt, yes, that's a great idea. Got to stay in touch with the crazies. You like that idea with the watching the craziest news clips of the week or the month or every other week. You like that? I like that too, I think. Thanks for the idea, Mariah. The aspiration to the idea. Grim says, let's watch Can Dialectics Break. Can't imagine the situationist who made that would have copyrighted. I could check that out. See how safe that is. My pop says, you can start that craziest news thing with the Anderson Cooper interview with the Dipsy Las Vegas mayor. That was something else to see, right? Well, I'll grab that. That's a great idea. Grim says, I'm pleasantly pleased at the dissolving of the dirtbag left without Bernie to leech cloud from. I'm not with you on that, actually. I hate that whole all that crap. Wait, hold on. Maybe I misunderstood. Because Rad Dad says TrueNon is biting everyone, and Grim says it's so good. Rad Dad says today's drama is so good. What happened today? I think I misunderstood Grim's comment. What's going on today? Rad Dad says, Matt, invite me to Discord challenge. Message me on Twitter or on Patreon, and I'll get you the Discord link. I've missed this completely. What's going on, Grim? It's so funny seeing as Liz Franczak has been an Amy Therese fangirl for the past year. What am I missing here? This is for anyone who's not familiar, this is like a leftist podcast personality drama that I usually try to have no interest in because a lot of those people I like, and even the people I critique, it's sometimes Champagne Kami says, oof, that's a great term, the loony left. Yeah, there's some, I think Michael termed the best one, which is Michael Brooks, the dumb left. But I really consider that to be like the Seth Rich people, not people who you have, who are a little bit less PC or whatever. The dumb left are like the Seth Rich truthers left. Champagne says, quite the distinction between the dumb left and the loony left. I think there's a overlap there. That's what I meant. I don't know if that'd be two separate things. Jesse used to have ties to Alex Jones, but he cut them a few years ago. Who's Jesse? What's going on here? Rad that says a prominent anti-fascist account was exposed as working with the Gates Foundation. What? Can you send this to me? Grim says loony left is kind of bad, seeing as it comes from lunacy, which was the whole feature of Thought Slime's latest pencil last week. I'm so out of the loop here. Okay, so Grim is breaking this down for me, and I'm gonna leave this here just so people aren't wondering what this all means. I don't know enough about it to have any sort of opinion on the matter, but here you go. Basically, says Grim, TrueAnon has been catching shit for being anti-Semitic, when they have been frequently anti-Semitic, particularly fixating on the ides that Israel is a pedophile paradise. I don't know. I'm not familiar, so I can't. Oh, Umar says Jesse the Body Ventura used to have connections with Alex the Elephant Jones. Yeah, that's true, but that's the conspiratorial side of Jesse that I mentioned. Zoe says he already forgot about Jesse Ventura. Listen, I'm tired. Wait, is Matt not seeing the super chats at all? Are there super chats coming through? It's not working then. Oh shit! There we go. All right. I gotta read these right away. I see them now. All right. I'm gonna end with the super chats. So, if you send a super chat, you're gonna be the most important. We're gonna end on your note. Thanks for calling them out, Champagne Kame. They were not coming up on the app. I use a third-party app for the chats. That's how I'm able to follow this and go so far back. I'm not on like the YouTube website because that goes so fast it'd be impossible. So I've got the super chats in front of me. Let me finish these last regular chats. Mariah says, regarding podcast drama, I had to block a What's Left obsessed guy who was harassing me on Twitter. What does that podcast do to people? I'm not even familiar with that one. I'm so out of the leftist podcast loop, to be honest. I know the people on Twitter, like the person, but in terms of what the content being said on those podcasts, I'm so out of the loop. Grim says that was some highly speculative conspiracy by Brace of TrueAnon that Gwen Snyder is uncivil on Twitter, worked for an NGO that was in some way funded by Gates and Bloomberg. Listen, I have no idea about that if that's true, but I've seen some of what that Gwen person has said about Chapo, and I'm sorry, they're A, weirdly obsessed with Chapo, and then B, I think what they're saying is patently false. You can criticize Chapo all you want. You can say they are wrong in certain areas. They are problematic in certain areas. I don't agree with you, but there are criticisms, obviously, that I would say, okay, it's not from my opinion, but they're legit. The idea that there's a Chapo to Fash pipeline, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's just ridiculous. That is ridiculous. I worked with Felix and Virgil at Cafe. They weren't there full time, but I talked with them and worked with them when they came in doing the Carl Diggler character. I've spoken with them. I don't know Matt, Will, and Amber other than from Twitter. But I personally, I wouldn't say I'm friends with them, but I was co-workers and acquaintances with Felix and Virgil. And I cannot. The idea that they'd be behind a Chapo to Fash pipeline is ridiculous. If you don't like how the dirtbag left is edgy and not PC, fine. I mean, Majority Report isn't PC in many ways either. I would say this show isn't always PC. That's a critique. But Chapo and the Majority Report in this show are not sending people to go out and slap on Nazi swastika armbands because we said some edgy jokes every now and then. I mean, that's ridiculous. Oh, What's Left is Amy Teresa's podcast, right? Um, Lord Ariane says there may be a Chapo to communist pipeline, but I don't know about Fash. Right. I mean, come on. Lord Ariane also points out there is a Democrat to Fash sympathizer pipeline. Absolutely right. So he says, to be honest, I don't find Chapo to be that edgy. I think Chapo gets a lot of shit that is not accurate at all. I mean, Chapo's a podcast that I have listened to. And I'm sorry. I don't see this insaneness that people are shout about whenever Chapo becomes the talk in terms of they really are not that extreme in terms of what people on Twitter seem to classify them as. I'm sorry. It's just ridiculous. You're absolutely right, Zoe. Grim says Virgil welcomed Sam Hyde to some comedy gig. You have to understand that in the early 2010s, what was that? That gig was what? 2011, 2012, 2013? The A lot of these edgelord comedians, and I use comedians the same way you used comedian when you said he was at a comedy gig, very generously. They were very well attuned to the dog whistle. I'm telling you, as someone who was there and saw the switch flip on so many people when the whole Gamergate shit started. You could be suspect of some of these guys before that era. The Gamergate time. But it never was fully clear for some of them. There were some who I think got by and it was like, come on, guys. It wasn't a surprise, this person. But there were others who was like, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm as someone who covers the right and has covered 4chan and stuff. I can say that, yeah, it's suspect if you're still on 4chan, but not everyone on 4chan is a Nazi or white supremacist or even a right winger. I mean, it's just the truth. You're doing, like I say a lot, you're doing a disservice to understanding what goes on in these uh, these racist movements and subcultures by not fully understanding the intricacies of these places and things. So that comedy gig, what was it, Rebel Girl? That was like what, 2012, 2013? Right? 2014 maybe? Things were still excuse me. All right, let's get to those super chats. I got the super chats. This is the last chats of the show, and they are the super chats. The people who donated money to this show during the YouTube to make sure I get to their questions or comments. Mariah with the $5 super chat. Mariah, thank you so much. You've been constantly giving me great feedback. I mean, I like even bad feedback. I should say constantly giving me feedback, which is super appreciated. I totally notice it. I want to really thank you. I think you've been a Patreon for a while too. $5 super chat, simply saying, here's one for you. Thank you so much, Mariah. Really appreciate it. Renee with the super chat in what is it? Is this Chilean bucks, right? So how's Cuomo regarding universal testing and quarantine? Better than Piñera or too low of a bar? Listen, Cuomo has been good at the showmanship stuff. And in relation to many other governors, especially Republican governors, he's also been very good. I mean, but then also he has been Andrew Cuomo. I'm going to do an episode on Andrew Cuomo during the pandemic, like specifically about Andrew Cuomo and why you shouldn't fall for his bullshit. I'm not sure how Pineda's been. Maybe you can tell me on the next episode. You'll come on as a guest, Renee. Because again, I am gonna have people on this show who reached out to me and said, "Hey, let's talk about this, that, and this," like who aren't typical guests. I've received your emails and messages and Twitter DMs. I have you guys on a spreadsheet. I'm going through it now. Champagne Kami, the $10 super chat. My God, thank you, Champagne Kami. As someone who's been covering the right for years, have you noticed how Chapo is a pipeline of left to fascism? I'm joking. Oh, I should have read that before we got into it. But I think that is the perfect way to end the show. All right, folks. That is today's program. I really don't know what I'm doing with the second half. I think part of it should definitely go with the first half, but then there's this other part that shouldn't. I don't know. I'll figure it out. Yeah. Maybe I'll just give the whole thing to everybody. All right, everyone. See you all next time on Doomed.